Before you judge me, let me tell you how quickly love can turn into betrayal. On the morning of my 62nd birthday, I believed I was going to celebrate with my only son. I wore my best sweater, fixed my hair, and even made his favorite pancakes. I thought the day would bring laughter, maybe candles, maybe a hug. Instead, I was handed a suitcase and left behind like unwanted luggage at a nursing home. That was the moment my world shattered. But destiny had something darker and stranger waiting just 1 week later. A twist so shocking that it turned my despair into power and my silence into a weapon. Stay with me, because this story is not just about betrayal, it is about survival, revenge, and the dangerous secrets buried in family ties. Subscribe now to Silent Lies and prepare yourself for the truth. I woke before the alarm because birthdays have a way of waking you with their own private drumbeat. 62. I lay still for a moment and listened to the house breathing around me. The soft creak of settling wood, the whisper of the furnace kicking on, a bird tapping at the gutter as if reminding me that life outside was already moving. I told myself to start the day the way I always did when Brandon was little, with pancakes. He had always preferred them almost too brown, edges crisp like lace, butter melting in bright golden pools. I set out 2 plates anyway, even though setting 2 plates had felt foolish for months. Foolish, but hopeful. I whisked batter until my wrist ached, because the motion calmed me, because a mother keeps doing, even when doing does not make sense. My phone stayed quiet, the kind of quiet that hums, the kind that makes you check for signal bars and then check again. I scrolled up through old messages, rereading simple words that now felt like artifacts. Love you. Be there soon. Sorry, work is crazy. I brushed my hair and picked my best sweater, the one the color of late lilacs, and pinched my cheeks until they looked awake. Outside, Dayton sat under a pale winter sun, thin and harmless. It did not look like the kind of day that would change a life. The doorbell rang at last, and it rang like mercy. I opened the door, and there he stood, my boy, taller than the doorway, his smile practiced and familiar. He held a bouquet that had traveled without water longer than it should have, stems banded tight with a rubber loop that left dents in the petals. Happy birthday, Mom, he said, his voice all surface. I hugged him. I inhaled the scent of his aftershave and the outside air and the faint smell of coffee on his breath, and I told myself that a hug is proof. He pulled back too soon. Get dressed, he said. I made lunch reservations. I wanted to ask where so I could picture the linen, the waitress, his face across a table, but I did not want to seem needy. I am a grown woman. I grabbed my small purse and the shoes that look better than they feel. We did not head toward downtown. He drove past the turn you would take for the Italian place, and past the bakery with the almond tarts I loved, and kept going until the maples grew thick, and the lawns grew larger, and the road curved into a long driveway dotted with leaves, the color of old pennies. The sign at the entrance was a polite rectangle with a tasteful font. Willow Pines Senior Living Facility. The letters felt like a slap, the kind that leaves no mark until later. I tasted metal. What is this, Brandon? I asked,
Hey, sweetheart.
already knowing and refusing to know. He cleared his throat. Mom, we need to talk, he said, the voice of a man who
I
has
have my
rehearsed
phone,
conviction in the mirror. This is not safe anymore. You live
Can I have my
alone.
phone,
You
please?
forget. That word slid across the car like a cold shadow. Forget. He listed small moments he had collected like stamps. The misplaced keys. The call I made when I could not remember a name that belonged to a neighbor who moved 2 summers ago. The one night I burned toast and did not open windows fast enough and the alarm shrieked like a living thing. He made a map out of accidents and asked me to live inside it. I told him to turn the car around. I told him this is my birthday. He did not turn. He parked. He opened the trunk. And there it
Hello
was.
there. How are you
A suitcase I
feeling today?
recognized from the top shelf of my closet,
You don't
brought
belong
down
here.
quietly while I slept or while I was in the yard deadheading Mums. Filled without permission, I stared at it and felt my face go warm and then cold, the way water does when the hot tap runs out. You went through my things, I said, and 4 little words held 30 years of love. Inside smelled like antiseptic and boiled carrots, a scent that tries to call itself care and cannot.
Really?
A woman at the desk smiled a smile that had
That's what I
practice at
heard.
it. Brandon slid papers across the counter with a speed that told me he had practiced this too. Power of attorney. Signatures that made a shape of my name but not my consent. He had arranged everything. Safety, he said to the woman. Activities. A community. He said it like he was leaving a dog with a sitter. He did not look at me when he said it. They showed me a room with an adjustable bed and a window that faced a brick wall as blank as a closed door. The paint was the color of oatmeal. The blanket had tiny pills on it, islands of wear. I sat on the edge of the bed and kept my coat on because surrender is easier when you take your time. Brandon hovered, then vanished in a flurry of last-minute instructions, then reappeared, then left for real. He pressed a kiss to my hair that did not land. The door clicked softly after him. A polite decapitation. I did not cry then. I watched shadows shift on the wall as the afternoon walked toward evening. I opened the bouquet. The petals had already lost their crispness and folded in on themselves, too weary to hold shape. I found a plastic cup and filled it with tap water and told the stems to drink. The cup tipped and dribbled on the nightstand. I mopped it with a tissue that tore itself into damp lint. The television in the hall murmured a game show where people shouted answers that did not matter. Somewhere a cart rattled. Somewhere a spoon tapped a rim. The soundscape of being set aside. When the nurse came at last, she called me sweetheart in a voice that had kindness inside it and pity wrapped around that kindness like a bandage that will not let the wound breathe. She told me my son had disabled my phone because it caused confusion. Confusion. I smiled so as not to scream. I told her I would like a crossword. She looked pleased. They are in the hall, she said, as if agency could be handed out like stapled photocopies. I thanked her because my mother taught me to be polite, and because fury sometimes looks like grace when you cannot afford for it to look like anything else. Time in a place like that does not move. It pools. It slicks across your skin. My roommate Doris slept with a determination that sounded like a sermon. She snored. A rough song. Once, in the middle of the night, she muttered the name of a man I do not know and laughed. Morning happened whether we wanted it or not. In the common room, a man argued with the weather. A woman folded and unfolded a towel until it thinned. I found the crosswords and filled squares until my hand cramped. I tuned a television to news because the world might still include me if I listened hard enough. I tried to trace the steps that had brought me to that room. Not the physical ones. Those are simple: bedroom, kitchen, front door, car, driveway, desk. The other steps, the ones you do with your heart. The nights I told myself he is busy, the days I told myself he is stressed, the months I told myself love can be a bridge you hold up by yourself if you must. I replayed conversations and watched memories shift color like bruises turning their way through the palette of healing. I felt a brittle laugh rise and pressed it back down because laughter is a surrender I did not want to make in front of strangers. I slept in a way that is not sleep. My mind kept making lists, as if lists could make a ladder. By morning, the room felt smaller. I asked for my phone again, even though I knew. The new nurse, a different one, said the same words as if there were a script they all learned. Too confusing. She softened it with a wink that pretended we shared a secret. I remembered the years of secrets I had kept for my son and understood the poverty of that kind of sharing. I ate what they gave me because refusing felt like giving him a victory I did not want him to have. The eggs were the color of damp straw and tasted like memory. I chewed anyway. I asked for a pencil with an eraser that still had some life left in it. I pressed letters into little white boxes and told myself names matter, dates matter, facts matter. If I could pin words down, I could pin myself down. The afternoon spilled itself and I picked it up, handful by handful. Small tasks can carry a person across an ocean if the person is stubborn enough. Late in the day, a young woman came to check my vitals, her hair pinned up in a crown of braids that made her look like someone who could carry things without dropping them. She adjusted the cuff and counted with her lips moving.
Aaron,
"You do not belong here," she said softly, so softly that it could have been my own thought. I looked at her and she looked back with eyes that did not pity. "Not lost," she added, shaking her head, more to herself than to me. Something in my chest that had been clenched for 2 days loosened by a degree so small you could not measure it. It was not a plan, not yet. It was a direction. That night I lay on my back and refused to let tears fall into my ears. I stared at the hairline crack that ran across the ceiling like a map someone drew in anger. I told myself stories the way I used to tell them to Brandon when thunder shook his windows. I told myself about the woman I used to be and the woman I could be again. Outside, a siren passed. Far enough away to be safe, close enough to remind me that life still broke open out there, for better, for worse. I folded my hands on my stomach and made a promise, and it sounded nothing like surrender. I stopped eating because my body could not make sense of what it was being asked to accept. The tray would arrive, steam lifting from something soft and beige, and I would lift the lid and feel my throat close, not out of defiance, but because food requires trust. It requires that you believe tomorrow is a place you are welcome to visit. The nurses noticed, because noticing is part of their job, and they spoke gently, because gentleness is easier than truth. They called me sweetheart and honey, and asked about grandchildren I did not have, about hobbies they hoped I would adopt like a kitten from a shelter. I thanked them with a smile that felt like a bandage. Underneath, the wound kept breathing. The days were quiet but not peaceful. Quiet has different species. The kind in a library that hums with concentration. The kind in a church that presses down on your shoulders until you bow. The kind in a facility like Willow Pines, which is the quiet of drawers closing and names fading. I did crosswords until the boxes started to feel like little traps. I reread a novel that had once comforted me and discovered the comfort had gone missing. I watched the news, not because I wanted to know what the world was doing, but because I wanted proof that the world still existed. On the fourth day, the young nurse with the braids returned. She introduced herself as Ruby, as if saying her name would make a small bridge appear between us. She checked my blood pressure and frowned like a sister would.
Hello,
"You do
can you
not
hear me?"
belong here," she said again. A statement that landed like a hand on my back, steadying, not pushing. We talked in the way people do when one of them is trying to make sure the other does not sink. She asked about my son with a careful voice, the way you touch a door you think might be hot. I told her enough that she could see the shape of my life without having to carry its full weight. Later, she came back and slipped something into my palm, furtive and bright, like a child sharing contraband candy. It was a lottery ticket, folded small, the paper softened from being handled. It belonged to a man who had died the week before, she whispered. Tucked into a Bible. No one claimed it. I laughed, but without sound. "You want me to try my luck?" I asked, and she tilted her head in a way that said the universe sometimes owes a person a strange mercy. That night, the facility settled into its usual chorus of squeaking shoes and distant televisions. I waited until the hallway was underserved, then slid into the lounge where a desktop computer sat like an artifact from a gentler decade. The screen woke up with a sigh. I typed in the numbers the way I would type a prayer if I believed someone was listening. The result arrived without ceremony. I stared until the numbers stopped being numbers and became a door. 7 figures. A sum large enough to change the architecture of a life. My first feeling was not joy. It was fear, clean and electric. Fear slices. It sharpens. It made me understand that luck is only useful if you can lift it and run. In the morning, I pulled Ruby aside. I told her I needed a lawyer and that I needed one who understood how to keep a secret. She did not ask why. She said a volunteer attorney came twice a month to help residents with wills and documents. She would call. When he arrived that Friday, he looked younger than the problem, but he had the eyes of someone who reads fine print for sport.
Hello, Sarah.
His
Thank
name
you
was
for meeting
Aaron.
me.
We sat in a
Of course,
cramped
it is my
break room that
pleasure.
smelled like coffee and lemon cleaner. I slid him the printed confirmation and spoke in a voice so careful I barely recognized it. "Can you help me disappear?" He did not blink. "We will need to move fast," he said. Speed became a lifeline. Paperwork, notarizations, signatures that grew calluses on my hand. A new phone. A mailing address that lived behind a locked door in a building I would never enter. An independent financial advisor who set up a blind trust so cleanly that my name vanished from every surface like a stain lifted by a professional. A new will that carried my love out into a future where it could do more good than harm. Everything stacked neatly in a folder that felt heavier than its weight. Ruby hugged me the night I left. "Do not forget us when you are free," she whispered. I could not promise anything except that I would remember. Dawn was a gray ribbon on the horizon when I walked out wearing clothes that did not belong to me and a face that had learned to keep still. The bus station was a geography of exits. I bought a ticket with cash to a place that felt like a coordinate rather than a destination. On the bus, I sat in the back with my hood up and my sunglasses on, though there was no sun to fight. I held the duffel in my lap like it contained my lungs. The road unspooled itself under us. Ohio flattened into Kentucky and kept going. I exhaled as we crossed the border, not because I was safe, but because I had moved. Aaron had arranged a house that a trust now owned, out in rural Tennessee. The kind of place no one looks at twice. Single story. Brick. The paint tired around the windows. A mailbox that leaned as if it had been through more winters than it wanted to discuss. Inside, the rooms held their breath. The heater worked. The water ran clear.
Case
The
dismissed.
silence here was different. It did not pity me. It asked nothing. It let me be a person rather than a patient. I became a shadow on purpose. I cooked simple meals because elaborate ones require company. I walked to the mailbox and back and treated that short stretch of gravel as if it were a pilgrimage. I sat on the porch wrapped in a quilt and watched the wind herd leaves across the yard like small animals seeking a better story. I checked the news, the way a person checks a bandage for bleeding. I searched for my name and did not find it. I learned the timetables of the local birds. I put the lottery ticket and all the papers that could save or ruin me into a fireproof box under a floorboard Aaron had loosened with a screwdriver and a muttered prayer. A week in, a delivery man knocked and left groceries on the step. Part of the arrangement. No signatures, no chatter. Still, the knock vibrated in my bones hours later. I told myself that fear keeps people alive, and then I told myself that fear also builds cages. I signed into a new social media account with a name that could have belonged to a girl I once sat next to in 10th grade. I searched for my son. His face filled the screen, handsome in a way that photographs are generous about. His latest post asked the world to help him find his missing mother. He said he was worried. People praised him in the comments for his devotion. I laughed until my body mistook the sound for sobbing. He had chosen an old photo for the plea, one where I wore a paper hat and he held a knife above a cake, and we both looked like happiness was a country we could afford to visit. Photographs make poets of liars. When the laughter stopped, the anger did not. It settled into the corners of the room like a watchdog. I remembered small moments he had twisted into narratives about my supposed decline. "You told me that already," he would say, when I had not. "You are forgetting more these days." Language is a tool. He had used it like a key to a door I never meant to leave unlocked. I called Aaron and told him to update the will again so that Brandon would receive nothing. It was not vengeance. It was an act of self-respect signed in ink. Then the letter arrived. No return address. Paper that felt expensive, as if money could make lies feel official. Inside, a photocopy of a loan document with my signature, my husband Richard's signature, and Brandon's, 12 years old, complete with a notary stamp and the bank's logo sitting there like a witness that would swear to anything. I studied the curve of the G in my name and felt the uncanny valley open under my feet. It was mine and not mine. Forgery is an intimate crime. It steals not only money but the shape of your hand. I opened the fireproof box and pulled out the folder Aaron and I had assembled in our small sprint to freedom. I compared dates, signatures, account numbers. I found 3 more forms wearing my name like a mask. A chill that did not belong to the room moved through me. The tension in the final years made a new kind of sense. The quiet arguments after dinner that I had filed under grief or fatigue, the canceled trip we pretended we could not afford. Emergencies that turned out to be lifestyle. Shame that had no business renting space in my chest. I did not cry.
I am not
I
finished.
turned on the lamp and opened my laptop and began to gather. Old emails, bank notices, the sort of small bureaucratic lint that collects in the corners of a life and becomes, when you lay it all out, a map. Over 3 days, a picture formed. Brandon had taken out loans with Richard's social security number and mine. Some had been buried, some paid, some blown like dandelion seeds into collections. One account still pulsed with a balance that had grown fat and ugly. It had defaulted 3 months before Willow Pines. The timeline sat there, undeniable. I called Aaron again. I told him what I had. The dates, the numbers, the way the forged signatures replicated my imperfections with creepy devotion. He believed me without ceremony. "Do you want to press charges?" he asked. "Not yet," I said, because I wanted him to feel the kind of fear that waits in quiet houses at night. I wanted him to wonder which way the wind would blow and when. I was finished being contained. I was learning how to hunt. I woke to the sound of my own breath, loud in the small Tennessee house, as if my body wanted to remind me that survival is a noise. Morning light came in thin and pale, pulling a soft ladder up the wall. The folder waited on the table where I had left it, fat with copies, tabs, and the kind of truth that cuts. I had spent 3 days turning my life inside out and laying it flat, following numbers that looped back to my son like tracks in snow. I made coffee I did not drink, and read everything again as if a second look might turn the nightmare into a misunderstanding. It did not. There is a moment, after you put the facts in a row, when the facts begin to look back at you. I saw the forged signatures that mirrored the shape of my hand and the slant of my patience. I saw the dates arranged like a cruel calendar, lining up loans, transfers, and withdrawals with birthdays, holidays, and the day my husband died. I saw how grief had made me a soft target, how love had made me an easy one. I felt the heat rise in my face and then drain away, the way a fever surrenders.
Brandon
I
was
called
with me
Aaron
that
and
night.
told him everything I had found. I could hear him writing, the sharp rhythm of his pen translating outrage into order. He asked me the question that matters in any war that pretends to be a family dispute. Do you want to press charges?
We
Not
must
yet,
consider
I
every
said.
angle.
I wanted time to build the kind of case that would not wobble under pressure. I wanted him to feel the air change and not know from which direction the storm would come. I wanted the luxury of calm. The house taught me the discipline of quiet. I spoke only when necessary. I kept the blinds at an angle that let in light but not eyes. I walked the perimeter of the yard and counted fence posts and found where a board had come loose and hammered it back into place with steady, simple blows. I made lists and then lists of the lists. I recorded audio notes on the new phone because I refused to let anyone ever again twist my voice into the shape of their story. Each note began with the date and the time. Each ended with the words, "I am of sound mind." It felt like drawing a line on a map where none had existed and then daring anyone to cross it. When the file grew as thick as my anger, I asked Aaron to help me reach beyond the local banks and the accounts that had my name printed on them in sad, familiar fonts. He had access to public databases I would never have known how to navigate. We sat on the phone, the line humming, while he walked me through what he could see. There it was.
We'll get through this.
Not rumor,
Thank
not
you.
family gossip, but a docket number that connected my son to a federal investigation. Embezzlement, identity misuse,
Your Honor,
fraudulent
I present
returns.
the evidence.
The words were clinical and cold, but they boiled something in me. One
The
term
patient
sat
did
there
not
like a
show
bruise.
any signs of
Identity
confusion
misuse.
during our assessment.
I said it out loud and felt my throat tighten, not because the term surprised me anymore, but because of how easily it could have been the title of my life for the last year. I clicked through public entries that had been redacted as if the black bars could mute the pain.
Case
I
dismissed.
saw enough to understand that Brandon had not just used my name, he had made a tool out of it. Returns filed that I had never signed, deductions invented out of air, an income I had never earned. I stood up from the desk so fast the chair rocked back on two legs and wobbled there like a thought. I paced the narrow room. I pressed a hand to my sternum as if I could hold my heart still. I did not dial the police. Not yet. Instead, I turned discipline into momentum. I filled manila folders and labeled them with dates and subjects and a small code only I would understand. I printed documents that lived on screens and put them into the same universe as the paper that had been mailed to my door. I stacked the evidence in neat piles until I felt I could stack myself again. I wrote a letter that I did not sign and put it with the documents that traced how my name had been bent and used like wire. I sealed the envelope and addressed it to the Department of Justice. I mailed a copy and put another in the fireproof box under the floorboard with the ticket, the trust paperwork, and a note to whoever might open that box if my story went silent. After the first package went out, I began to notice the world noticing me. A white sedan parked down the road longer than a person usually parks where there is nothing to look at. A man in a windbreaker knocked and claimed to be conducting a neighborhood survey, asking questions that tried to sound official and landed awkwardly, like shoes on the wrong feet. I watched from behind the curtain with the phone in my hand, my thumb over the emergency number that starts with 9. He left a flyer that had no phone number. My skin learned a new way to prickle. I told Aaron that we needed to finish building the fortress around my future. We finalized the trust. We added layers. We made the language so tight it squeaked. We ensured that if Brandon ever tried to reach into the structure I had built, his fingers would meet glass and law. The paperwork gave me a kind of courage, but it did not soothe the parts of me that still ached at night. I sat alone with the gray sweater pulled around my shoulders and thought about the original promises that bind mothers and sons, the quiet vows made over cribs and homework and scraped knees. I thought about the night my husband died and the way Brandon leaned on me, and how I mistook weight for closeness. I let the ache come and go without apology. The letter from Brandon arrived without a return address and without ceremony. The paper felt expensive in that particular way that tells you the sender wants you to feel outmatched. Inside there was a single sentence written in his impatient, slanted hand. "I know what you did, and this is not over." I read it once as his mother and once as his opponent. As his mother, I felt the old impulse to fix, to excuse, to search for the wounded boy who used to cry when he thought he had disappointed me. As his opponent, I filed the letter in evidence, threats, and moved on. Days lengthened. The sun rose later and fell earlier, a narrowing that matched my focus. Brandon created a public theater. His social media turned into a stage where he played the worried son to applause that sounded like forgiveness he had not earned. He appeared on local news and asked anyone with information to come forward. The comments praised his devotion. I did not answer the screen back. I cooked a simple stew and ate it slowly and reminded myself that patience is not the same as passivity. Aaron called one afternoon with a voice that was careful, in the way a person is careful when they carry a heavy bowl across a slippery floor. The journalist had reached out, a woman with a reputation for getting the truth into rooms that prefer gossip. She wanted to hear my side. I told him not yet, not because I was hiding, but because you do not step into the light until you have decided exactly what to say and exactly what you will not surrender. He agreed. He always agreed when I chose control over catharsis. I did not expect peace, so I learned to accept precision. I woke early and reviewed my notes. I rehearsed my own story, not the parts that beg for sympathy, but the parts that stand up under cross-examination. This is what happened. This is what I did in response. This is what I can prove. This is what I will not forgive. I understood that every sentence would have to carry its own weight. I practiced not flinching. When doubt tried to creep in, I went outside and let the cold air argue with it. The trees were bare, but the field across the road had a stubborn green at the edges. Crows announced themselves with voices that sound like warning bells. Once, a stray cat padded across the yard and studied me with the caution of a creature that has survived more winters than it planned. I sat on the step and spoke aloud the oldest promise I could make to myself. I will not let him write the ending. The envelope from the county courthouse broke the rhythm I had built. It was official and certified and heavy in a way that made my stomach coil. Inside, a petition to have me declared mentally incapacitated.
You are not well.
There were statements from a neighbor and a friend of his who knew next to nothing about me, painted in the colors of concern. There were audio clips of my voice sliced out of voicemails and stitched into a picture of instability. There was even a letter from a psychiatrist I had never met, papering over lies with medical ink. I felt the room tilt. Then I put my palm flat on the table and steadied it. I called Aaron. He came that night. We spread the papers out and began to arrange a response that would not merely defend but dismantle. He told me we would get an independent evaluation. He told me we would build a timeline that showed a woman who was not only competent, but deliberate. He told me I would need to be unflinchingly calm. Panic is the prey they are hoping to flush, he said. I nodded. I went to the bedroom and chose a navy coat with silver buttons because sometimes you need clothing to remind your spine that it knows how to stand. I did not sleep long. I did not need to. In the morning, when the light came slow and the house breathed like a creature at rest, I sat with a pen and wrote one more note to myself, dated and signed. I am of sound mind. I am not lost. I am no one's victim. Then I folded it and placed it with the others, a small stack of declarations that felt finally like a beginning. The courthouse in Dayton breathed a different kind of air, recycled and cool, the kind that dries your throat before you have spoken a word. I could hear my shoes on the tile like a metronome I had not agreed to follow. Aaron walked beside me with a briefcase that looked heavier than it should. His jaw set in that particular way that says a man is already arguing a case in his head. I wore a navy coat with silver buttons and my husband's old watch. Its face ticked and scratched, but still precise. I had promised myself I would not beg. I would be heard. Brandon was already there. He rose when I entered, not out of respect, but to display himself the way a window displays a curated life. He wore grief like an accessory. His attorney shook hands with people who mattered and arranged papers so that they would look like facts. I sat where I was told and placed my folder on my lap. Inside were copies of the evaluation appointment, logs of my daily tasks, receipts and records I had accumulated one truth at a time. I rested my palm on the cover as if it were a heartbeat. The judge had tired eyes that suggested he had seen every version of love that had curdled into litigation. He called the matter in a voice worn smooth by repetition. In the matter of Margaret Taylor's mental competency, the words were clinical, but they collected in my chest like smoke. Brandon's attorney stood and began to knit a story out of assumptions and edited fragments. He talked about my disappearance as if I had vaporized instead of chosen. He talked about erratic messages and confused calls, splicing my loneliness into a diagnosis. He set a trap made of tone. He introduced a letter from a psychiatrist whose name was new to me. Concern, possible impairment, risk. He played voicemails where my voice had been cut into the worst seconds, each vulnerability arranged like a necklace of proof. I watched the judge's eyebrows rise. I felt the room tilt by degrees. It is a peculiar cruelty to hear your own voice turned into an argument against you. It is like watching a stranger move around in your skin. Then Brandon spoke. My son addressed the court with the careful tremble of an earnest man. He said he loved me. He said he feared for me. He said he only wanted to protect me from people who might manipulate me. He turned his head toward me as if to include me in the protection he offered. And for a split second I saw the boy with scraped knees who once asked for a second story at bedtime. Then I remembered the suitcase. I remembered the brick wall outside the window in Willow Pines. I remembered my disabled phone and the lottery ticket folded against my heart like a lifeline. Memory steadied me. When it was our turn, I stood. The courthouse chair made a soft sound as it let me go, as if furniture could be reluctant. My name is Margaret Taylor. I am 62 years old. I am of sound mind. I am not lost. I am not anyone's victim. Each sentence felt like a stone placed with care on a foundation. I handed the bailiff the independent psychiatric report from Dr. Levine, signed, dated, and certified. The judge read without expression, but I saw his shoulders settle. Aaron guided the tempo, measured and clean. He submitted logs of my daily activity, receipts of the trust setup, phone records, and a notarized affidavit stating that I had left the facility lucid and deliberate. I felt my pulse slow as the truth thickened the room. Then I added what I had chosen to hold in reserve. I said that there was more, but I would not present it unless forced. I would not turn this hearing into a criminal indictment unless I had to. I saw Brandon's mouth tighten because he knew exactly what I did not say out loud. The forged signatures, the loans, the filings under my name that he had scattered like seeds into systems that would eventually sprout consequences. I turned to the judge. My son placed me in a facility without my consent. He took my phone. He took my voice. He is now asking this court to take the rest. I ask you not to participate. The judge leaned back. He steepled his fingers. He spoke slowly, as if each word needed to be placed precisely to avoid breaking something fragile. He would review the documents. He would schedule an independent evaluation. The court would reconvene in 2 weeks. The gavel did not slam. It sighed. The hearing adjourned. In the hallway, the sound returned to the building like water returning to pipes. Brandon tried to catch my eye, perhaps to practice a tenderness that had not survived contact with reality. I kept my gaze forward and walked. One step and then the next, each heel a small declaration on the tile. Outside, the air tasted of winter and car exhaust. Aaron exhaled in a long line. "We have begun," he said. He did not promise outcomes. He promised work. The days between the hearings moved like a weather front, slow on maps and faster in your bones. News leaked, because news always finds a seam. A local station ran a segment that framed me as a question mark and Brandon as a worried son. Comments bloomed like mold under a sink. Why had I not called? Why would a mother disappear? Was someone whispering in my ear? I turned off the television and let the house be quiet. I wanted my mind to be a room I could trust. Dr. Levine came to the Tennessee house at noon on a day with clear light. She was brisk without being cold and kind without being soft. She asked about childhood, timelines, habits, choices. She asked about Brandon, and I told the story the way a witness tells it when she knows there is more trial ahead. I did not ornament my answers. I did not fight her questions. I told her about pancakes and a suitcase. I told her about a lottery ticket and a box beneath a floorboard. I told her what it feels like to hear your name used as a tool by your own blood. She listened with her pen down. When she left, she touched my hand and said, "You are very clear." Clarity sharpened everything else. I rehearsed what I would say if the court tried to fold me into the shape of a diagnosis. I memorized dates and amounts the way actors memorize lines, because I had learned that the truth requires craft to survive spectacle. Aaron and I constructed a timeline that showed how Brandon's attempts to seize control lined up with withdrawals from his failing business. We did not accuse in ink. We laid roads and let anyone willing to drive see where they lead. The second hearing dawned colder. Brandon walked in with less air in his shoulders. His attorney shuffled papers faster than confidence usually requires. The judge began without flourish. We went first. Aaron's opening was a wire stretched tight between two posts. He presented Dr. Levine's full evaluation. He presented the timeline. He presented affidavits that documented my independent choices. He presented the legal structure of the trust that exists to protect me rather than to isolate me. Then he addressed, with the same calm cadence, the public record of an ongoing federal investigation tied to Brandon's name. He did not infer. He did not inflame. He placed the docket in front of the judge like a mirror. Brandon's attorney rose to object, but the judge lifted a hand and the objection sat down. The courtroom shifted in that subtle way that tells you gravity has moved from one side of the scale to the other. Dr. Levine took the stand. She spoke clearly and without rhetoric. She said I showed no cognitive decline. She said I was deliberate, consistent, aware. She used words that courtrooms respect: sound judgment, insight, autonomy. I watched the muscles in Brandon's jaw jump. His mask had grown heavy. The judge asked his questions, careful and precise. He read more than he spoke. The silence that followed felt long enough to live inside. When he finally delivered the decision, he did it without theatrics. Based on the evidence, the evaluation, and the inconsistencies in the petitioner's claims, the court dismissed the case. My financial accounts and personal autonomy were restored. I remained competent in the eyes of the law and, more importantly to me, in the record that would outlive us all. I gathered my papers. I stood and my knees did not shake. Brandon did not try to touch my arm. Fear had come home to him in a suit and tie. I walked out into winter sunlight and let the cold scrub my lungs clean. The war was not over, but the ground had shifted. I had defended my name and won. Now I would decide what to do with the victory. I thought of Ruby's hands, warm around me in that fluorescent hallway. I thought of the other residents staring at muted televisions. I thought of the box beneath my floorboard, waiting like a seed. I breathed in air that tasted almost new. Then I went to work. I turned off the television after the ruling, but the story did not turn itself off. Brandon went straight from the courthouse to the cameras. He stood in front of reporters with his voice trembling in all the right places, painting himself as the devoted son whose mother had fallen into the wrong hands. He said I was confused. He said I was being manipulated. He said he feared for me. The broadcast ran on every local channel that week, and the comments poured in like sympathy sold wholesale. I watched once, then muted the screen. The lies were predictable. What mattered was what I still held: documents, signatures, timelines, and the truth arranged like an arsenal. That night I called Aaron. He came to the house with a steady face and listened while I slid an envelope across the table. Inside were copies of every fraudulent loan, every forged signature, every return Brandon had filed under my name. Send it, I told him. Not to the court, to the Department of Justice. Send it anonymously. He turned the pages with quiet hands, his lips pressed into a line, and nodded. This will get their attention. I counted on it. I could not just wait. Waiting is what victims do. I wanted to act. I used one of the new identities Aaron had built for me and transferred $5 million into the account of a national nonprofit that fought elder abuse. The money moved like lightning into the system, nameless, faceless. Within a week, they had launched a campaign that echoed with my story. Though no one said my name, people began to ask questions. How does a mother vanish, reappear in court, and face her own son's attempt to erase her? Whispers thickened into doubt. Doubt curdled into suspicion. A journalist called next. She wanted to meet. She promised anonymity, just truth. We sat in a small cafe 2 towns over,
Hello.
me in sunglasses and a hat, her recorder between us. I told her about Willow Pines, about the birthday that ended with a suitcase, about Brandon disabling my phone and my line to the world. I told her how dignity can be stolen with paperwork. I left out the lottery ticket. That was still mine. 2 days later, her article ran, Mother or Millionaire? The silencing of Margaret T. The internet lit up. People speculated. Was I the anonymous donor? Was Brandon trying to cut me off from my own life because money was at stake? Doubt became a chorus that he could not control. 2 days before the court reconvened, Aaron's phone rang. It was the Department of Justice. They had received the file. They were opening a case. My son did not know it yet, but the fire under his carefully staged performance was beginning to rise. By the second hearing, his face had lost the smug composure he wore like cologne. His lawyer's whispers looked more like begging than strategy. Aaron presented our evidence. The evaluation that declared me lucid. The financial logs that mapped Brandon's withdrawals to his own debts. The docket number of the investigation already circling his name. The judge dismissed his petition without hesitation. My autonomy was mine again.
You were not weak.
I walked out of the courthouse with my head high while my son's mask cracked for everyone to see. The news moved faster than either of us. Brandon Taylor, son of a woman once labeled missing, was under federal investigation. Comment sections flipped. The same strangers who once praised his devotion now questioned his story. Reporters circled. His business faltered. His wife filed for divorce. The man who thought he could bury me under paperwork was now suffocating under headlines. When the DOJ announced his indictment for fraud, wire crimes, and identity theft, I read the article in the stillness of my kitchen. My tea steamed. The house hummed. I felt no triumph, only the hollow that betrayal leaves behind. Victory is not sweet when it comes from the ashes of love. The arrest came quietly. No sirens, no spectacle, just a headline. He posted bond, of course. Money buys time, but not redemption. His empire of manipulation crumbled. Clients vanished. Friends dissolved into shadows. Alone, exposed, he had become exactly what he once accused me of being. Vulnerable. And still, my grief was not for him. It was for the years I spent believing love could hold a person steady, for the blindness I chose in the name of family. I stepped outside into the Tennessee wind and watched the trees bend but not break. I thought of Ruby's words. "You do not belong here." She had been right. I did not belong in a room with a brick wall for a view. I belonged here, in the open, where truth breathes even if it burns. I pulled my coat tighter and walked back inside. The war was over, at least this part. The legacy of what came next was mine to decide. I did not speak for 2 days after the indictment. Silence felt like a room with clean walls where I could decide what to put back up. The television remained dark. The phone face down. I cooked eggs and burned the first batch, then tried again, because trying again is a muscle you can train. I wrote a list that did not ask for anything from the world. Sweep the porch, water the fern, pay the utility bill, breathe. Outside, the wind worried the bare trees. Inside, the heater clicked and hummed with the steady patience of something built to last. There are victories that shout, and there are victories that arrive like a hand placed gently on your back. Mine was the second kind. On the third day, I called Sarah, the journalist. I told her I was ready to speak on camera. No aliases, no shadows, just a name and the truth that belongs to it. She asked if I was certain. I told her certainty is a luxury you earn by surviving. The studio was quiet when we recorded. The lights soft, the air cool. I wore a gray sweater that did not try to flatter me, and small silver earrings that were exactly what they were. Sarah leaned forward. "The world knows the headlines," she said. "Why now?" I looked into the camera and felt the lens looking back, and I said, "Because silence keeps the wrong people safe." I told the story without rushing and without apology. I did not mention the lottery until the end. When I did, I said it the way a person admits to a fact that does not define her, but changed the map. A ticket became a door. I walked through. The program aired that night. I did not watch as it went live. I stood at the window and watched the sky deepen instead. In the morning, the town felt closer. At the pharmacy, the young man behind the counter slipped a note into my paper bag. "My grandmother says thank you." On the sidewalk, a woman in a navy coat touched my arm and said her mother had finally left a bad situation after seeing my interview. Their eyes did not carry pity. They carried recognition, which is a quieter, stronger thing. I went home and sat at the table and let the feeling fill the room. Not triumph, not relief, something steadier. I had spoken, and the truth had found ears that wanted it. Work is another word for recovery. I met with Erin and a woman from a national nonprofit that had quietly tracked my case once the donation arrived. We spread papers across my table until the wood disappeared. We talked about what a real defense for elders would look like. Not a pamphlet or a hotline alone, but a structure that could muscle its way into rooms where abuse is disguised as concern. Legal clinics that show up in facilities and do pro bono checks on power of attorney documents. A fund that pays for independent psychiatric evaluations when families weaponize confusion. Training for social workers and judges on how manipulation dresses itself in filial duty. We gave it a name because names make things real. The Margaret Project. I did not blush. If my name was going to be used to erase me, then I would use it to write other people back into their lives. Brandon was indicted. He posted bond. He went home to a house that was now too quiet. His wife filed for divorce. Former clients disappeared. He stopped talking to cameras because cameras had stopped being kind. I did not read every article. I learned the headlines and let the rest drift by. There is a difference between accountability and fixation. I held to the first and let go of the second. I returned to Willow Pines on a morning that looked washed clean. The maple trees were bare and elegant. The parking lot half full. The lobby smelling faintly of coffee instead of boiled vegetables. Ruby saw me through the glass before I knocked. She came running, all bright eyes and strong arms, and when she held me, I felt something in my chest unclench that I had not realized was still tight. "You changed everything," she said. I shook my head. I just stopped letting other people define me. We walked the halls together. Doris's old room had been turned into a reading lounge. The televisions had captions and the remotes were not hidden. In the activity room, someone had put real books on the shelves, not only word searches with missing pages. Ruby squeezed my hand, and I understood that a place can be cruel by neglect, and that it can also be redeemed by attention. That afternoon, I spoke to residents and staff. I did not bring a speech. I brought a promise. I told them that their names are not numbers and their lives are not a line in a chart. I told them that anyone who tries to put a leash on their dignity does not love them, no matter what language they use. I told them about documents and rights and the difference between support and control. I told them that fear is common but silence is optional. When I finished, there was a stillness that did not feel empty. Then hands came together, some slow, some strong, and faces opened the way windows open when winter finally loosens its grip. Launch days are usually for products or rockets. Ours was a stack of filings, a website built with clean fonts and no patience for nonsense, a bank account, and 3 pro bono attorneys who did not blink easily. The first calls to the Margaret Project were not dramatic. A daughter needed help retrieving access to her mother's phone that had been shut off by a nephew. A widower had questions about a signature that did not look like his. A facility wanted training for their staff on how to spot a forged letter from a doctor. We answered, and when we did not know, we found someone who did. The work multiplied, the inbox filled with stories that hurt to read. I learned to close the laptop at 5, make tea, and step out onto the porch to let the wind carry some of the weight away. Brandon tried once more to reach me. An envelope slid under my door. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a photograph from my 60th birthday, the one with the yellow sweater and the messy frosting, and a sentence written in his slanted hand. "You always believed in me. I am sorry that was not enough." I sat with the photo until the day dimmed. I did not cry. I fed a small piece of paper into the fireplace and watched it curl and blacken. Not punishment. Release. Love without truth is a story that does not end well. I needed endings that honored the beginning without being owned by it. The plea deal arrived like weather. 10 years if he said the word guilty. A trial if he did not. Aaron told me the terms in a voice that had stopped trying to make bad news easy and had learned to let the truth stand on its own feet. He thinks he can outsmart the system, Aaron said first. Then, a week later, he took the deal. I folded the information into the place inside me, where I keep facts that do not require further thought.
Hello.
He would go to prison. He would have time to sit with who he had become. The rest was not mine to manage. I wrote letters in December. Real letters on thick paper that drank ink the way dry ground drinks rain. To Ruby, thanking her for seeing me when I was ash gray, and for handing me a spark anyway. To Aaron, for giving my fury structure. To Dr. Levine, for giving my clarity a certificate and refusing to treat me like a diagnosis. I thanked them not for saving me, but for standing beside me while I saved myself. Then I wrote one more letter, to the person who had needed it the longest. Dear Margaret, you were not weak. You were not foolish. You were a woman who loved deeply, and then chose truth when love betrayed you. You picked up the pen and wrote the ending yourself. I signed it, folded it, and placed it in a small wooden box on the mantel. Snow came on a Sunday, soft and deliberate. The town went quiet in the good way. The way that makes you notice the sound of your own steps and the small animals drawing signatures in the yard. I put on boots and walked to the mailbox and back. The cold found the hollow places and filled them with clean air. I held my hand out and caught a single flake that lasted a heartbeat before it became what it had been all along. Water. Everything returns to itself, eventually. I unlocked the door and stepped inside a house that felt fully mine. The heater hummed. The cat, borrowed from a neighbor for the winter, blinked and returned to sleep. I set water to boil, opened the window a crack, and let the new year slide its fingers under the old to lift it away. Thank you for listening. If you have a story, tell it. Your voice matters. And if you are watching, subscribe to Silent Lies, because there are more truths to tell, and I intend to keep telling them. When you reach the end of a story like mine, it is tempting to label it as victory, to point at the courtroom win, the indictment, the foundation born from ashes, and call it justice. But justice is not neat. Justice does not arrive wrapped in ribbons. It arrives through scars, through nights of doubt, through letters you burn in the fireplace because holding them would keep you chained to a past you can never fix. I lost something permanent when my son betrayed me. It was not just trust in him. It was the soft part of me that once believed love could conquer
Thank you so
everything.
much.
That peace will never return.
course.
And yet, in losing it, I gained something sharper. The will to define myself. No more
You saved
silence.
yourself.
No more letting other people tell the world who I am. That is why I stood before cameras. That is why I built the Margaret Project. That is why I continue to speak now. Because this story is not just mine. It belongs to every person who has been silenced in the name of love. To every elder pushed aside under the excuse of care. To every victim of betrayal hidden behind polite smiles and forged signatures. If you are listening, remember this. You are not a burden. You are not forgotten. You are not finished. Your life does not expire because someone else decides it should. Dignity is not theirs to grant or revoke. It is yours, written into your very breath. So I tell you this with all the strength I have left and all the freedom I fought to keep. When they try to erase you, pick up the pen and write yourself back. When they tell your story wrong, tell it louder, clearer, with the kind of truth that makes liars choke. When you feel abandoned, look toward others who have walked this path and know you are not walking it alone. My journey ended in freedom, but it was not free. It cost love, it cost innocence, it cost the illusion that family is always safe. But in the end, I stand. And if I can, so can you. This channel, Silent Lies, exists for that very reason. To share the stories others would rather keep hidden. To remind you that behind every betrayal is a survivor, and behind every silence there is a voice waiting to rise. If my voice reached you today, then let it remind you of your own. Subscribe to Silent Lies. Stay with me. Stay with us. Because there are more truths to uncover, more scars that deserve to be seen, and more lives waiting to be written back into existence. Your voice matters, your story matters. And together, we will not be silent anymore.